And today I'm very excited about this one. I believe this one is going to be a very, very interesting conversation. We have Brent Tipton. He's a great coach with a really bright future and a dear friend. We recently are talking very often online, and we share a lot of ideas. He's a really, really insightful coach with a
What
lot of
we've been
very good
talking
ideas
about
and
with
topics that we
the
will
rest of
be
the
discussing
coaches.
today. So thank you very much, Brent, for being here with us. Let's start with a very
Thank you,
simple.
Oscar. It's a tremendous pleasure to be talking with you and just talking about the stuff that we're going to talk about. I think it's very impactful for coaches at every single level, and it's just really a pleasure to share, what we've been talking about with the rest of the coaches.
I completely agree with you. Let's start with a very simple one. Player development. What's your definition of player development on and off the court?
Well, that's a tremendous question. I want to kind of go through what my three core values are as a coach, because I think that will outline why I believe what I believe in with player development. The first core value is relationships. The second core value is holistic development. And then the third core value is having a growth mindset. So these encompass my entire view of player development. So with our player development, we want to enhance the present player and develop the future player. So player development must focus on both the individual and the team. So we must work towards expanding a player's game beyond their current role while balancing that with improving our chemistry as a team and our team concept. So on the court, we believe that decision making is a premium skill and skill development, or a premium skill in skill development. And we should not isolate decision making from our fantastic five. So our fantastic five are shooting, passing, pivoting, dribbling, and then the ability to defend one-on-one. We also not only want skill acquisition in the Fantastic Five, but we want skill adaptation. So we want to equip our players to find solutions in the ever-changing competitive environment. So in our player development, we focus on both the individual skills and the team tactics through their Fantastic Five. And we want to expand players' game beyond their current role while balancing their effectiveness in our team dynamics. So we want them to star in their role today, but grow mindfully to what they want to become tomorrow. And this process, as we're going to discuss, is a collaborative process between us as coaches and the player. And then at the end result, we want the end result of our player mastery to lead, or player development to lead to mastery. And again, that mastery is a holistic approach.
That's a lot of very good ideas right there. That's very interesting. I believe everyone should be following these core principles and this focus of uh, focus of attention if you want to develop a very, very solid program, taking care of the holistic approach to the player development. And it's not only what you do on the court, it's not only the skill development per se and the technical details of how they want the holistic approach that takes care of everything else around developing a player. In your in your article, a transformational response to athletes' mistakes, uh, that simple word that could be the origin for a very, very long debate. Let's define mistake first.
Sure. So I don't want to get too technical with this, but I do want to paint a picture of what I view as a mistake. So we believe in the coupling of perception and action, and because of this, we place the greatest value in decision making. And what separates a good player from a great player is how they use their skill based upon what they perceive. So this is why players can look really good in on or drills that are on air, but when it comes to live play, what they do doesn't translate, and defense causes them to make a mistake. So technically and tactically, I believe mistakes are mistakes of vision, or mistakes of what the athlete perceives. So a player makes a mistake because they either did not execute a skill at the correct time or execute the skill at all because they didn't know where to look on the court. So for an example, a creator at the point of a screen in a mid pick and roll pass to a player lifting out of the corner after a single side tag because the creator didn't read the tag correctly or the coverage at the point of the screen. So for me, a mistake is where a player did not perceive what the opponent was enough or did not see what the opponent was doing at all, thus made the mistake. So we as coaches play a role in helping players through their mistakes by teaching what to look for and then where to find it on the court, and then making every practice scenario applicable to what decisions are made in a game. So that would really kind of overview of how I view a mistake in context to a player.
Talking about youth development, because we also can talk about skill development or player development in professional levels or adult levels. But speaking about youth levels, how can we explain the difference between mistakes and failure, for example?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I have never really thought about this before, honestly. But I only think we can label a player a failure if they did not reach their true potential because of a lack of work ethic. Now, with that being said, if a player is labeled a failure but has a tremendous work ethic, then I need to examine what I'm doing as a coach. And here's what I mean by this. Since we believe decision making is the skill that we place as the premium skill, if I neglect decision making during a player's development, I'm neglecting the most important factor in an athlete's long-term development. So I don't ever want to be the source of this failure for an athlete. And so when it comes to that youth development side, we're going to take away the athleticism. We're going to take away, how they are in stature, and we're going to place a premium on decision making. And then I feel like I will be the source of failure for a youth player if I don't teach a player the components of where to look in their decision making.
Can we talk about intentional and unintentional failures? What do you think, Coach?
I just had a conversation with this today with a local coach here on Guam, and we were talking about a specific player, and this player was having a hard time. He knows what to do, but the responses to what he sees during a game, it doesn't fire immediately. So this player makes a mistake. And something that we also discussed was, where is their cognitive ability? And there's some learning disabilities that come into a player's cognitive ability. So whereas they may make a mistake, but it's not a result of lack of effort or a lack of hustle. It just comes down to their cognitive ability and understanding a concept. And so I don't think that we can label that as a failure. But I think at the end of the day, I think every coach would agree that if a player is unsuccessful because of a work ethic issue, then I think that would be deemed appropriate, that player would be a failure.
I always put it from the coach's perspective, and we like very little to be said that we are making mistakes doing our job, but we hate to be said that we are failing. So that is something that it's really important to keep in mind when we refer to players and what they do on the court. If they are, failing or making mistakes, then that's we don't spend enough time on explaining the difference. And I remember during my training as a coach in Spain that was a very important focus of attention for everyone to explain the difference between mistakes and failures to move on from that once that you start working with players. You mentioned and there is a lot of noise nowadays about different types of methodologies of training. And you mentioned on the article transactional versus transformational. Is that correct? Did I say it correctly?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Where did you hear about this in the first place?
Well, I first heard of transformational coaching in a book I read about 2 years ago called Inside Out Coaching, and it was written by Joe Ehrman. So this book really opened my eyes to how we must take a transformational approach if we are to impact our players' overall long-term holistic development. And this book gave a great description of how we as a coach impact players more psychologically and socially than we can ever imagine. And this book in particular really lit a fire in me to pursue this topic more on transformational coaching and what I need to do better to coach with this certain and specific transformational philosophy.
Can we find, is it even possible to find the balance in between transactional and transformational, or that should be our duty, or is it something that it's almost impossible to achieve?
Right. Yeah. I don't think that you can mix being transactional on the court and then being transformational off the court, and then vice versa, trying to be transformational on the court, but then being transactional off the court. This is going to come down to transaction and transformation is going to come down to what level of play are you coaching? I'm a youth coach. I coach under 17 national team. So some of our players are still in that development phase. We even have some 15-year-olds that are on our under 17 national team. And so, I mean, we're definitely not at a professional athlete level to where, we may not have that as much transformation between athlete and coach, but where I'm at in my own coaching journey, I believe that we cannot mix the two. I firmly believe that I need to be a positive transformational coach when I'm approaching coaching my players.
So, well, I haven't mentioned before. And that's my bad because we usually do this as a follow-up for the article. But Brent is the head coach of the U17 one men's national team, as well as the assistant coach for the one men's senior national team and Asia Oceania regional director of the at the basketball embassy. And as Manu, he's an FECC graduate from 15 to 18. I said that, and let me piggyback a little bit before about what we were talking about, circling back. I mentioned that about finding balancing between transactional and transformational because I've seen way too many coaches trying to be one thing on the court and the other thing off the court, or vice versa, and they cannot understand why it's not working for them. They cannot understand why am I being a transactional coach on the court, and then I'm trying to be very nice and transformational and caring about the kids, tough love and all those things from old school. Because I believe that probably they don't understand the benefits of being transformational, especially in youth development. What will be your advice for those coaches?
When we're coaching youth, I think it goes back to our egos as coaches and why are we coaching? Are we coaching, to be transformational, or are we coaching for our own ego? And some of the advice that I would give is I really think we have to evaluate as coaches why we're coaching. Are we coaching for ourselves and how we want to be viewed by either the public eye or be viewed by our leagues? And I think we need to approach it with humility and understanding that the role of a coach can impact kids that we don't know about for 10 years down the road. And if we can have that every time we step on the court, knowing that when I coached a certain kid today, what I say, how I act, how I behave, the result of what I do in this practice may not be seen today, but it could be seen 10 years down the road because I had this transformational philosophy and I wanted to holistically develop an athlete. I think that would be the biggest advice is we can't be egotistical. And I say that kind of hypocritically because I'm a very egotistical person. I'm a very selfish person. But I think we have to be self-aware that as human beings, we have those tendencies to be egotistical, and then trying to combat that philosophically, but also with just our self-awareness, I think will be huge in how we coach our players.
You started the article mentioning that you pretending that you were angry about what happened in the practice, and coaches leaving practice thinking, and that I mean, I saw myself reflected on those sentences, thinking that this is enough for me. I'm quitting. I am not going to coach anymore, and being frustrated like that. Do we have the right to be angry at our players if things go wrong in practice?
I think the short answer is no. The easy answer is no. We do not have the right to be angry at our players when things go wrong in practice. But a powerful quote that I even stuck with me, and it's powerful. A lifetime on the lips can be a lifetime on the heart. A moment on the lips can be a lifetime on the heart. So a moment of transactional feedback and a fit of anger, sarcasm, or passive aggressive response due to an athlete's mistake might be a moment on my lips, but my egotistical response can be etched into the heart of my athlete for their entire life. Now, whether it's emotional or behavioral, I firmly believe that reacting in anger or bits of egotistical frustration has absolutely no place in a transformational environment. When we do act transactionally like this to a player's mistake, the underlying tone, as I've already mentioned, is we don't want our ego or knowledge challenged, so we act in this manner. We act egotistically. And really cool thing Don Showalter says is players don't have bad practices, coaches have bad practices. So reacting to players' mistakes with anger is going to reveal our lack of emotional agility, which I know we're going to talk about here in a bit. But more specifically, reacting in anger is just my response to my own ego. It's a response to and either not knowing how to help a player through their mistake, so we blame the athlete for the mistake, or it's a response to blaming the athlete for not listening to our teaching as coaches. So we blow up in fits of anger and rage. So when we address our issue of wanting to protect our ego as coaches, our impact on our players will deepen, and then our responses can become transformational.
And going on this, I remember a recent conversation that I had with a coach, and he was talking about the abilities or the skills of a very good coach, and he was talking about humility, being humble, the humility, the perspective, not thinking that it's about you, it's about your players and your team, and resilience. And he said something that resonated with me a lot, and actually it's kind of related with what we just mentioned. He said, "Never be the kid's last coach," and that is so powerful. The way
Right.
that we
Yeah.
can impact those kids, those players, it's so powerful and we forget about it way too many times probably.
Yes.
Um,
That's powerful. That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah. How should we manage that frustration that you were talking about in the article at the beginning when the process doesn't look like we expected? Because it's normal to feel, we spend a lot of time, we're supposed to spend a lot of time preparing our sessions, our seasons, caring about everything that is going on the court, off the court, and then it doesn't go in our preferred or ideal way. How can we manage that?
That's a shift I've made probably in the last year. And the shift to handle my frustration when players make a mistake or it doesn't go like I expect it to is to normalize athlete error. And that can sound very simple or complex, but I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into normalizing athlete error. Regulating our emotions during athlete error is imperative if we desire to have a transformational response. So a transactional response to athlete error involves reacting egotistically with anger, resentment, and even sarcasm. So normalizing error doesn't mean that we ignore athlete error altogether, but it's a methodology for how we respond to athlete error. Mistakes must be made by an athlete. And then when we punish players for making a mistake, we create this learning environment of fear, and specifically the fear of making a mistake or the fear of failure. And I wish I could say this in all caps. Our job as coaches is to practice, or our job in practice is to find this balance between normalizing athlete error in the context of players learning. So in the article, I discussed creating an error positive learning environment and how athlete mistakes are a valued part of their learning. So the learning environment, or another word for practice session, it must be safe for an athlete to fail. Athletes want to know they can make mistakes. If they make a mistake, that they will be coached and not judged. And the phrase I say to myself, it's either a daily phrase as I this, or it's even just a weekly thought. If a player does something correct, praise them. If a player does something wrong, coach them. And I just want to point out that I didn't say if a player does something wrong, criticize them. Sometimes we can mix coaching and criticism, and I believe this is dangerous for coaches to do. Too often, I feel coaches take that athlete error too personally and think it's a reflection of them as teachers or coaches, and then they respond with anger or resentment. So I think that goes into how we can handle the frustration is, do we normalize athlete error? And then as we we dive deeper into this conversation, how do we give that feedback while a player makes an error? And how do we normalize it so a player feels safe that they can actually try to be creative while they're practicing or while they're playing?
You're talking about errors, you're talking about feedback, you're talking about control, and coaches have control. Coaches have power, like you said also in the article, but not always we know how to use it or control it. What comes to your mind in terms of coaches misusing their power to impact and influence through sports?
That's a great question. I think that we should always strive to teach rather than just expect performance from our players. And I think that we should motivate rather than manipulate. And here's what I kind of mean by that. What this looks like when we abuse our power is we coach with punishments or we use manipulation as motivation. So abusing our power as coaches is what I believe all about getting what I want in the next 10 minutes of practice. But what happens in the next practice when we abuse our power again to get what we want? Um, we abuse our power sometimes when we think a player is not doing something we think they should be doing or doing something we think that they shouldn't be doing. So what is our response? Obviously, a transactional response is yelling and anger through telling the athlete what they did wrong. But a transformational response would be using a coach intervention where the coach guides the athlete with posing questions to help the player's self-awareness and self-regulation. Now, how we use our positional power or our personal power determines what type of learning environment we create, and if our responses to players' mistakes are transactional or transformational. So I want our learning environment or our practice environment to be error positive. We can't control players' mistakes, kind of like what you just said, but we can control our response to it. And we are either going to view mistakes from a player as error negative or error positive. And part of the art of coaching is using players' mistakes with our personal power to help them grow technically, tactically, psychologically, and even socially. So mistakes are a value part of learning in an error positive learning environment. And these mistakes become an opportunity for us as coaches to implement transformational coaching principles. And these principles are focused around using our personal power.
That's an awesome response, and that gives me a lot of things to reflect on and think about. It's really powerful. Thanks for sharing. Emotional intelligence, emotional agility, those two terms that got me a lot of very interesting thoughts and ideas. Um, let's talk about both terms and how they affect your job, our jobs.
Mhm. So emotional intelligence, I think that I was pretty aware of emotional intelligence. I read a book on it like 6 or 7 years ago. But this thing about emotional agility is new for me, and I've recognized or I've become self-aware of how I'm not emotional agile. So emotional intelligence in relation to coaching involves the ability for coaches to self-regulate their emotions to consistently respond correctly to athletes' mistakes with empathy and truth, or by telling the player the truth. Emotional agility is the application of emotional intelligence. And it involves the ability for us coaches to possess self-awareness that our emotional intelligence will be tested uniquely and differently by each athlete and in each teachable moment. So applying emotional agility during an athlete mistake means we know how to respond to his or her error with patience, with calmness, and with maturity. And this is where providing transformational feedback comes in. If we have emotional agility towards our athletes, we're going to exhibit open and inviting body language to enhance nonverbal communication. And we're also going to demonstrate active and reflective listening to acknowledge an athlete's voice, which I think is something that we miss often as coaches is we don't listen to our players. And then the last thing is, I think if we have emotional agility, we're going to speak effort and growth mindset language to inspire continual athlete development during their mistakes. Now, what does a lack of emotional agility look like? I think the biggest revealer of if I have a lack of emotional agility is how I respond to an athlete's mistake or how we detect athlete error. So an example would be this. Let's say an athlete makes a mistake during a game, or you don't think a player is doing something you think they should be doing, and I respond with anger or egotistical frustration. If I need growth in my emotional agility, I'm going to react in a way to let everybody in the gym know that I, as a coach, did not teach that player to make that mistake, or we're not the cause of the player making a wrong decision. So we behave in a way to either embarrass the player, to inflate our own ego. So we act immaturely by yelling, demonstrating negative body language, demonstrating anger, also showing displeased facial expressions. Well, the question to this or to myself is this response transformational or is it transactional? And I firmly believe that reacting in anger or bits of egotistical frustration has no place in a transformational environment. So when we do act transactionally like this to a player's mistake, the underlying tone is we don't want our ego or our knowledge challenged, so we act egotistically. Now, on the flip side, what does emotional agility look like? Well, I think it comes back to what we've already discussed, what we've already talked about: understanding my personal power as a coach, normalizing athlete error, understanding the role of forgetting or athlete forgetting, and then having emotional agility as a coach is also seeing and knowing how to provide transformational feedback and the desiring to enter a learning partnership with our players. And I think it's very imperative that we form our philosophy on this, so it will help us lead in better implementing emotional agility as we coach athletes through their mistake.
Let me please allow me to retweet you live a question from our dear friend and professional coach Manu Peña on Twitter. As we are speaking right now, he's telling you, you talk about emotional agility, and you suggest that your behavior could impact the athlete by the example. Are we coaching when we are not coaching?
Wow, that's a great question. Yes. I think every player wants to please their coach. I know I sure did. And although we don't want players always looking back at us for instruction, we want players to self-regulate. We want them to lead themselves and to lead their teammates. But uh, even though we shouldn't be the center of the coaching or of the environment, we should not be in a coach-centered environment. We should always be in an athlete-centered environment. It's it's impossible for the coach to not go and detect it. And so I think when we're sitting on the bench, our posture while we're sitting on the bench, the posture, how we greet players when they come off the court, our facial expressions. When a player makes a mistake, what are we doing with our hands? What are we doing with our face? What are we doing with our body? Yeah, I think we're coaching when we're not coaching. And sometimes silence means approval as well. So I think with that in mind, we cannot coach, but if our players understand that if I'm silent, that means you just play. Like, I'm just enjoying watching you play. I think a player should know that. If I'm silent as a coach, I shouldn't be passive aggressive. That shouldn't be a passive aggressive form of my communication to a player. I really believe that if we're silent as a coach, it should mean approval, and that I approve of what you're doing. Go ahead, keep playing, keep being creative, keep having fun.
This could go for hours. I'm enjoying the conversation a lot.
Mm,
But let's just start wrapping it up. We always try to
sure.
keep it sharp and on schedule. And we also recognize your effort because I know that you're in Guam. It's also
Mm,
like almost 10:30 p.m. right there. So um, in Sport Coach, we are all about sharing the game and trying to provide the best tools for coaches all over the world, and that's what we do. And we are proud, and we show pride of the people that are cooperating with you with us, like your case right now. Um, in your particular case, what kind of resources are you using to keep growing and being better every day as a coach?
That's a good question. I hope, I know people learn different and people have different schedules, but um, when it comes to these type of topics, I had spent so much time over the lockdowns that we had here on Guam studying X's and O's, and I was trying to, I tried to dive into 2 to 3 topics as deeply as I could. But I was challenged by a couple of mentor coaches that I need to dive more into the psychosocial components of an athlete. And so I got a text message from one of my coaching friends. He said, "Hey, check out this podcast." It was a podcast by Doug Lemov on his book, A Coach's Guide to Teaching. And so just listening to that podcast and then reading through his book, if you haven't, as a coach, if you have not looked at that resource, the book is called A Coach's Guide to Teaching by Doug Lemov. He goes through a lot of these things on, not really transformational, but um, how we can better understand our players, more specifically, how they learn, and then um, how we can help them through their mistakes. And so I think that as far as this particular topic, he's written several books as a teacher towards, school teachers. But I think those concepts are definitely applicable to us as coaches, just because we too are working with players in a learning environment. Our learning environment just happens to be in a sport on a basketball court.
That's a great one. I agree, and that's a great book from Doug Lemove. I read it a while ago, and it's really transformational per se. It's a transformational read for coaches, and I recommend it. Brent, thank you so much for your time, your preparation, the kind of passion that you share with all of us when we have the chance to have a conversation. I really I do enjoy mine every time I have some time to talk with you. I recommend everyone to go back to our blog and read your article, a transformational response to athletes' mistakes. There are a lot of very good thoughts and ideas down there, and I encourage everyone to follow Brent on Twitter and the rest of the social media platforms that he's using, because he's always sharing and creating a lot of very good content, a lot of gems. So thank you very much for your time, Brent. Keep in touch, stay safe, and keep sharing the basketball, man.
Thank you, Oscar. And I just want to say thank you to you and Sport Coach, and just, there's a lot of people out there trying to share, but when Sport Coach in particular and yourself are doing just a tremendous job, and on all sports, really just trying to share how we can be better. And when we put our players first and we are getting better, not just for ourselves, but for our players, I think that has the biggest impact on future generations. So thank you for your sharing, and thank you for the opportunity to share on this platform.
Our pleasure, man. Our pleasure. Thank you so much, Brent. Take care. Keep in touch.
Thank you.
Bye.